Flight attendant refuses food to cancer patient. 6 minutes later, she's fired immediately. A flight attendant refuses a cancer patient's straightforward meal request, and just 6 minutes later, she is dismissed on the spot. What led to this astonishing turn of events, and who truly bears the responsibility? You won't believe what unfolded next. Before we dive into the story, please share in the comments where you are watching from today, and if you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. A flight attendant, a bustling airport, and a routine flight that rapidly escalated into a viral incident. Everything appeared normal as passengers boarded the plane, getting comfortable in their seats. But the situation changed dramatically when a passenger requested special food due to his medical condition. What appeared to be a minor request quickly triggered a series of unforeseen events that caught everyone on board off guard. A small error, a denial, and just 6 minutes later, one employee found herself unemployed. It began when a man fighting cancer approached the flight attendant, Sarah Thompson, seeking a meal that adhered to his dietary needs. He explained that his condition made it challenging to consume standard food and that he required something specific. Sarah Thompson, already pressed for time with a busy flight approaching, glanced at her meal list and informed him, "I'm sorry, we don't have that option available." It wasn't that Sarah Thompson was reluctant to assist. Rather, there was a misunderstanding. She believed that special meals were reserved for pre-ordered requests. The passenger, clearly uneasy, attempted to convey his situation more urgently. He didn't wish to create a disturbance, but he was feeling overwhelmed. He had endured a lot already, and this was meant to be a swift process. The flight was calm, but in that moment, the refusal struck hard. He felt frustrated and embarrassed, and confusion began to grow between them. Other passengers started to take notice, some murmuring as their gazes shifted from the man to Sarah Thompson. The tension was palpable. Sarah Thompson had no idea that this seemingly simple conversation would spark a much larger problem. Before she could complete her rounds, the situation began to escalate. Just minutes after the exchange, a supervisor arrived, and the atmosphere changed dramatically. Sarah Thompson wasn't unsure of what had transpired. She suddenly found herself being asked to step aside. Just 6 minutes. That's all it took for a minor misunderstanding to escalate into the termination of an employee. Sarah Thompson was blindsided. One seemingly simple interaction had completely altered the course of events. The confusion continued as she struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. Meanwhile, the passenger, still hungry and frustrated, quietly expressed his discontent to those around him. His state had heightened his sensitivity to such situations, and it didn't aid the situation that his request was brushed aside so swiftly. What had started as a misunderstanding was escalating into a more significant problem, and the atmosphere on the plane became increasingly tense. Sarah Thompson stood off to the side, attempting to determine her next steps, but events were unfolding too rapidly for her to grasp. Before long, the supervisor stepped in, and the matter had evolved beyond just a meal request. Meanwhile, news of the incident circulated, and murmurs filled the cabin as other passengers began to take notice. A sense of unease began to settle in. Some passengers expressed sympathy for the man's medical needs, while others, uncertain about the situation, started to form their own judgments. Sarah Thompson's supervisor, Paul, wore a serious expression as he spoke to her. Although their conversation was inaudible, the air was charged with tension. The man who had requested a meal was not asking for anything unreasonable. He merely needed something suitable for his medical condition. Yet at some point, the airline's protocols clashed with the reality of human needs. Sarah Thompson attempted to explain, but before she could utter a word, Paul had already turned away, his decision made. It wasn't long before the flight attendant was informed that her services would no longer be needed that day. The words came swiftly and harshly. She was being let go. Sarah Thompson was in disbelief, stunned by how quickly it all unfolded. It felt almost surreal. There was no opportunity to argue or clarify. She had acted in what she believed was the right way at that moment, but it wasn't sufficient. And just like that, it was over. As 4 minutes and 31 seconds ticked by, the flight that began like any other took an unexpected turn. The passenger, oblivious to the chain reaction triggered by his request, could only observe Sarah Thompson departing, her head bowed as she struggled to comprehend the situation. As she navigated the cramped aisles, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, yet one question persisted. How had everything spiraled out of control so rapidly? She never intended to cause any distress. She had merely adhered to what she believed were the standard procedures. Yet now it seemed those very rules had let her down. She couldn't afford to linger on it as the flight pressed on. Passengers whispered softly, but no one had the courage to voice their concerns. The atmosphere on the plane was charged, though most attempted to carry on as usual. The cancer patient, who had ignited the whole ordeal, sat silently in his seat, visibly uneasy. He hadn't intended for any of this to unfold. All he sought was a meal to help him endure the flight, but now it seemed he was caught up in something much larger than he had anticipated. Meanwhile, in the airline's operations room, tensions were rising. The choice to terminate Sarah Thompson had already been finalized, but the repercussions were just beginning. A handful of passengers had turned to social media, sharing their thoughts on the incident almost as soon as the flight departed. The early posts expressed astonishment, highlighting the unusual situation of a flight attendant being dismissed mid-flight. Reactions poured in rapidly, with many were in favor of Sarah Thompson, believing that the situation was exaggerated. Conversely, some supported the airline, insisting that safety procedures must be adhered to for consistency. However, the conversation quickly evolved. What began as a few scattered posts transformed into a much larger debate. People started discussing not only Sarah Thompson's actions, but also the wider issue of how airlines handle passengers with medical conditions. Some raised concerns about the rigidity in such delicate circumstances, while others criticized the airline for its lack of understanding. Established protocols for scenarios like this were in effect, and the news circulated quickly. Local outlets started covering the story, and soon national media followed suit. Sarah Thompson, oblivious to the media frenzy developing outside the cabin, couldn't shake the sense that she was entangled in something far more significant than a mere error. The phone call soon followed. Her manager contacted her in an attempt to mitigate the situation, but the harm was already done. The viral aspect of the incident was irreversible. She was no longer merely an airline employee. She had become part of a broader discussion emerged regarding empathy in customer service and the regulations that shape the airline industry. What initially appeared to be a minor issue on a standard flight rapidly escalated into a public relations crisis. News of Sarah Thompson's termination spread across social media at an alarming rate, and as the narrative developed, it garnered significant attention. Individuals from around the globe began to express their opinions on the incident, with many supporting Sarah Thompson, arguing that she was merely fulfilling her duties and that the response was exaggerated. Some individuals supported the airline, contending that rules and procedures must be adhered to without exception. However, as the public discourse intensified, a more profound and troubling inquiry surfaced regarding the airline's policies and their treatment of passengers with special medical needs. The story of the cancer patient circulated widely, and while the public generally expressed compassion for his health challenges, there was also significant frustration over the management of the situation. This led some to wonder why a seemingly straightforward request could not have been addressed with greater sensitivity. A lack of empathy had escalated rapidly, and the media swiftly seized upon the matter. Soon, customer service and hospitality experts were sharing their insights on the situation. Many emphasized that while rules hold significance, it is crucial to strike a balance between adhering to procedures and acknowledging the humanity of those being served. Under mounting pressure, the airline issued a statement clarifying their perspective, asserting that Sarah Thompson's refusal to provide the special meal stemmed from an oversight. Policy indicated that employees were merely adhering to established procedures, yet the statement did little to quell the uproar. In fact, it appeared to exacerbate the situation. The public was unconvinced by the notion that Sarah Thompson's dismissal stemmed solely from a minor error. The narrative had transcended the initial incident, transforming into a representation of how larger organizations frequently overlook the unique needs of their customers. Sarah Thompson's situation emerged as a rallying cry for those who believed that customer service, in general, was often inflexible and impersonal. By this point, the pressure the airline faced overwhelming scrutiny from news outlets seeking answers, while social media erupted with calls for a boycott. Sarah Thompson, who had never aimed to ignite a movement, found herself unexpectedly at the forefront of a rising call for corporate accountability, empathy, and the necessity of transparent communication. The airline's public relations team was in a frenzy trying to manage the repercussions, while Sarah Thompson, now at home, observed her life transform into the focal point of a nationwide discussion. As the days went by, her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and even strangers flooded in. Some extended their support, while others criticized her choice. The gravity of the situation began to sink in. She had lost her job, yet it felt as though that loss was not the most significant aspect. The narrative, now widely shared, depicted her as the antagonist in a story where airline policies conflicted with human compassion. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She had transformed into a representation of a broader issue, one that transcended her personal decisions and was deeply intertwined with a system that favored rules over adaptability, led to increased media attention, and soon Sarah Thompson found herself receiving interview requests. Some interviewers were sympathetic, while others sought to manipulate her story to align with their own narratives. Sarah Thompson was swept up in a storm of conflicting emotions, never having anticipated such a turn of events. At the core of the entire incident was a single moment of misunderstanding, a miscommunication regarding food. Yet this had ignited outrage, public debates, and scrutiny beyond anything she could have imagined, completely upending her life. It appeared that she was being compelled to justify herself to a world that had already made its judgments. The cancer patient, too, found himself entangled in the fallout. He addressed reporters, sharing how the situation had impacted him. While his health remained paramount, he confessed to feeling conflicted between his desire to support Sarah Thompson and his need for understanding. It was evident that neither of them sought the turmoil. They merely wished for a seamless experience. However, the truth was that the incident had done more than merely attract attention to, in the airline's customer service policies, revealed flaws in a system that appeared overly rigid and excessively profit-driven, neglecting the individual needs of passengers. As the debate intensified, Sarah Thompson found herself in a challenging situation. On one hand, she empathized with Manny's anger over her dismissal, which felt unfair and hasty. On the other hand, she recognized the airline's difficult position, needing to safeguard its reputation and adhere to the regulations that ensured operations ran smoothly. Flight attendant refuses food to cancer patient. 6 minutes later, she's fired immediately. But what about the human aspect? What about the cancer patient who had merely requested a meal made Sarah Thompson ponder whether there was a more compassionate approach to address the situation? Was there space for empathy in a society so fixated on rules and regulations? And if so, could the outcome have been different for her? These questions weighed heavily on her mind as the narrative unfolded across every screen. As the public discourse progressed, it became evident that the repercussions from the incident would linger for quite some time, with the media frenzy gaining significant traction. The narrative evolved into something much more significant than just an incident on a flight. It transformed into a representation of the mounting discontent many experienced with large corporations and their frequently inflexible, impersonal policies. Sarah Thompson was repeatedly sought out for interviews, yet each time she attempted to articulate her thoughts, the words eluded her more than she anticipated. She lacked a definitive response, no tidy explanation. She was merely an individual who had endeavored to adhere to the rules, and unexpectedly found herself at the heart of an uncontrollable tempest. In the meantime, the cancer patient, whose name became closely associated with the incident, found himself in the midst of attention he never sought. Despite his desire to remain out of the spotlight, he could not overlook that the focus on him extended beyond his medical condition. Conversations began to shift toward the treatment he received, not only from Sarah Thompson, but also from the airline as a whole. The matter transcended the issue of food. It evolved into a broader discussion about how individuals, particularly those with health conditions, were treated by corporations that appeared more invested in adhering to procedures than in genuine care. Rather than providing genuine care, the man conveyed that his primary desire was simply to have a meal he could enjoy during the flight. Instead, he found himself entangled in a storm where his health and needs seemed to take a back seat to broader concerns of corporate accountability and employee welfare. It was at this juncture that the airline released an official statement which did little to quell the turmoil. They admitted that Sarah Thompson's termination stemmed from her non-compliance with their protocols. Yet they also expressed remorse that the situation had intensified. The statement appeared insincere, suggesting the company was attempting to mend the situation without genuinely grasping the underlying problem. They mentioned reviewing their policies and training programs, yet the harm was already inflicted. Public confidence in the airline was diminishing, and Sarah Thompson's sudden dismissal raised questions about whether the company prioritized its reputation over the well-being of its employees. Sarah Thompson's family and friends, who recognized her as a dedicated and kind individual, now had to witness her facing difficulties. The burden of a public narrative that felt disconnected from her reality weighed heavily on her. Sarah Thompson had always been someone who adhered to the rules, excelled in her role, and assisted passengers to the best of her ability. However, that day had taken a turn for the worse, and she was facing the consequences. It wasn't merely her job on the line, it was her reputation, her livelihood, and her very identity. Yet amidst her own feelings of injustice, she found herself empathizing with the cancer patient who had become entangled in the situation. She had never intended to deny him food. She was merely adhering to the protocols instilled in her. In her view, she was not the antagonist, but rather an employee striving to fulfill her duties in an environment that expected flawless performance, even amidst human mistakes. However, the system had let down both her and the cancer patient, along with many others who faced similar challenges. As the narrative unfolded, so did the public's quest for clarity. People began to call for improved care for passengers, particularly those with special requirements, seeking to understand why such a situation had occurred. A straightforward request for a meal went unanswered, leading to questions about why someone like Sarah Thompson, who had always been trouble-free, was dismissed immediately for what many perceived as a minor error. More crucially, there was a desire to understand whether the airline would genuinely take this as a lesson. Would it keep prioritizing policies over compassion, or would it seize this moment to improve the experience for all, not just those who adhered to the rules? In the days following the incident, Sarah Thompson found herself caught in a seemingly endless cycle of interviews. Social media posts and online discussions had escalated beyond her expectations. She found herself grappling with a persistent thought that kept her awake at night. Had she erred in her actions, or had she merely become the unfortunate symbol of a much broader issue? As weeks went by, the initial shock of Sarah Thompson's dismissal receded, yet the questions it sparked remained. The public's anger did not wane. In fact, it grew stronger. Online petitions emerged calling for accountability from the airline, drawing support from individuals across various backgrounds. At 1737, it became clear that the discussion was not limited to just passengers expressing their views. An increasing number of individuals, including customer service specialists, medical professionals, and even some airline employees, stepped up to share their insights. Many experts emphasized that the fundamental problem lay not in Sarah Thompson's behavior, but in a more profound systemic failure. They contended that airline policies frequently overlooked the human aspect, particularly in emergencies or when dealing with passengers who had specific needs. The airline industry, as a whole, the entire structure had centered on efficiency, strict schedules, and cost-cutting measures. While these were essential for managing a large corporation, they frequently compromised personal care. The reality was that such systems often lacked the flexibility and empathy that could have significantly impacted Sarah Thompson's experience. If the airline had been more understanding towards passengers with medical conditions, the problem might have been addressed before it intensified. However, Sarah Thompson's predicament was not solely a result of the system's shortcomings. It also reflected her own circumstances. Sarah Thompson found herself grappling with her personal struggle to come to terms with the incident. The more she reflected on it, the heavier it became on her mind. She replayed the moment repeatedly, the passenger's request, her refusal, and the exchange that escalated rapidly. At times, she doubted her decisions. Had she been too inflexible? Should she have made an exception for the man's special request, considering the situation? She felt caught between two conflicting realities, one where she was simply doing her job and adhering to company policy. The guidelines in the situation where her choice resulted in a public spectacle that cost her job were both seen as valid by each side, yet neither provided her with a definitive sense of closure. For the cancer patient, the aftermath was equally complex. Although he wished to avoid being entangled in a public conflict, he couldn't overlook the discomfort he felt regarding Sarah Thompson's dismissal. He recognized, perhaps more than anyone, the frustration of having one's needs overlooked, especially since he had just made a request himself for something as straightforward as a meal to support him during his flight. But when the media began to spotlight him, he understood that the situation had escalated far beyond anyone's original intention. It was no longer merely about food or Sarah Thompson's error. It had transformed into a discussion about our treatment of individuals with special needs and how businesses frequently prioritize efficiency over personal care. In one of the rare public statements he issued following the incident, the passenger clarified that he bore no anger towards Sarah Thompson and held no resentment. He merely hoped for understanding. If things had been approached with greater empathy, he pointed out that the airline could have effortlessly sidestepped the issue by providing the needed accommodations or suggesting alternatives. Instead, it escalated into a news story, leaving him to ponder the broader implications. It served as a stark reminder that for individuals with health conditions, even minor inconveniences can turn into significant hurdles. A meal on a flight should not be among them. As the narrative continued to capture media attention, the airline began to sense the mounting pressure. The public's perception was shifting swiftly, and in a bid to restore their reputation, the airline released another statement. This time, it went beyond merely defending their actions or clarifying policies. They recognized the public's frustration and conceded that the situation could have been managed more effectively. They committed to reassessing their customer service training, especially regarding special requests and emergencies. However, by that point, many had already formed their opinions. The harm was already inflicted, and people were not just frustrated by the way Sarah Thompson was treated, they felt disheartened by a system that appeared to prioritize rules and regulations over human needs. Behind the scenes, Sarah Thompson grappled with the drastic changes in her life. She had always taken pride in being a diligent and responsible employee. While not flawless, she performed her job effectively and truly cared about assisting passengers. Now she found herself doubting everything she once believed about the airline, her career, and even her own identity as the reliable, rule-following individual she had always been. The employee appeared to fade away, feeling like a victim of a broader problem that was out of her hands. Yet as the narrative unfolded, she found herself pondering whether there might have been a more effective approach to the situation. Would it have changed anything if she had been afforded more time to reflect? If the airline had offered her greater support? Ultimately, those inquiries were irrelevant. What truly mattered now was the public perception of the incident and the transformations that were starting to emerge. Not only within the incident at the airline sparked a broader discussion across the entire industry regarding the value of policies and procedures, particularly when they result in situations like this. In the weeks that followed, the narrative took an unexpected turn. Sarah Thompson, now unemployed and facing the repercussions of her actions, started to receive messages of encouragement from various sources. Some were from past colleagues, while others came from total strangers who viewed her as a representation of a more significant problem within the airline industry. They recounted their personal experiences, highlighting inflexible policies and systems that neglected the genuine needs of customers. Many viewed Sarah Thompson not as a villain, but as a casualty of a flawed system that valued rules over empathy and human connection. However, despite the increasing support, Sarah Thompson couldn't escape the sense of having disappointed everyone. The guilt persisted, particularly as she encountered some of the more severe criticisms online. Some individuals were relentless, labeling her unprofessional and condemning her actions for not managing the situation more effectively or held her accountable for the public backlash. The differing viewpoints complicated Sarah Thompson's ability to gain a clear understanding of the matter. Should she embrace the support from those who believed her dismissal was unfair, or should she acknowledge her role in how events unfolded? Each day, she grappled with these dilemmas, seeking some form of resolution. Meanwhile, the cancer patient, whose needs had ignited the entire episode, found himself in an unwanted predicament. His health challenges had already made his life difficult. It was challenging enough, and now he found himself ensnared in a media whirlwind he never sought. He had unwittingly become a figurehead for those pushing for improved customer service in the airline sector. What began as a straightforward request for a meal accommodating his dietary restrictions was meant to be a routine flight. Instead, it morphed into a spectacle that thrust him into a discussion he wished to avoid. He never anticipated that his need for a particular meal would spark a viral narrative, protests, and an escalating public outcry. As more interviews with him were broadcast, it became evident that his feelings regarding the incident were complex. On one hand, he recognized the anger many expressed over Sarah Thompson's dismissal. She had operated within the limits of her role, and while her choice was regrettable, it was not driven by malice. On the other hand, he could not overlook how the airline had let him down during a vulnerable time. They failed to take the time to comprehend his needs. His request was not unreasonable. It was merely about seeking something essential, the appropriate meal for his health issue. But ultimately, he was deprived of the nourishment he required, and Sarah Thompson lost her job as a result. In the midst of the media uproar, he chose not to assign blame. Instead, he leveraged his influence to advocate for a wider dialogue. He emphasized how individuals with medical conditions frequently face challenges from systems that fail to recognize their unique requirements. While airline regulations are crucial for safety and efficiency, they often overlook the specific circumstances of passengers. He emphasized the significance of flexibility and empathy in customer service, especially regarding vulnerable individuals. As he continued to share his insights, more people started to pay attention, not only to his personal experience, but also to the broader issues it revealed. The airline, under increasing scrutiny, issued another statement to reshape the narrative. This time they recognized shortcomings in their policies and procedures concerning passengers with special needs, admitting their failure to provide adequate support. The adaptability needed in such circumstances led them to commit to reviewing their training programs, vowing to make adjustments to ensure that future incidents would be approached with greater empathy. However, by then, the harm had already been inflicted. The public's frustration extended beyond Sarah Thompson's dismissal. They were disillusioned with a system that appeared overly concerned with strict adherence to regulations, rather than recognizing the distinct needs of individual passengers. In the weeks that followed, the dialogue broadened beyond this singular event. This sparked a broader conversation regarding customer service in various industries, prompting individuals to ponder whether companies were genuinely catering to their customers or merely performing their duties without any sincere consideration for the individuals involved. The narrative of Sarah Thompson and the cancer patient emerged as a significant case study, highlighting crucial inquiries about the conflict between regulations and compassion. For Sarah Thompson, this time of introspection proved to be both challenging and enlightening, as she had always been a person who took pride in adhering to procedures and following the rules, now recognized how that strictness had come at a cost. She had concentrated too much on the regulations and not enough on the individuals affected. It dawned on her that while policies were important, there needed to be space for empathy, particularly when interacting with passengers who were vulnerable or in distress. The incident had revealed her own shortcomings, and she found herself reflecting on how she would handle similar situations moving forward as things began to calm down. Began to reflect not only on the airline's policies but also on the broader culture in which they function. Could situations have been managed differently? Certainly. However, looking back, it became clear that the issue extended beyond a single meal or flight. It was a systemic problem impacting both passengers and employees. The reality was that failures occurred due to inflexibility, a lack of empathy, and a disregard for human connection. Now, with the situation fully exposed, the pressing question remained. Could the airline and others take this as a lesson learned? Would this mark yet another missed chance for change? As the debate progressed, more voices entered the discussion, and the impact of Sarah Thompson's firing became increasingly evident. What began as a singular incident involving a flight attendant and a passenger swiftly transformed into a wider critique of customer service standards, especially within large corporations. Although the media frenzy had subsided, the underlying tension persisted. The conversation had shifted. It was no longer solely about Sarah Thompson or the cancer patient, but rather a broader examination of the issues at hand. The fundamental approach that companies adopted regarding their employees and customers, particularly in sensitive situations, highlighted a crucial realization. While policies are essential for structure and efficiency, they often prove too inflexible to address the unpredictable nature of real-life scenarios. The airline adhered strictly to its procedures, yet those procedures did not consider the unique circumstances of a passenger with a medical condition, leading to a refusal to provide a special meal. The discussion surrounding food highlighted a more profound issue: the struggle of numerous institutions to adapt and demonstrate empathy during crises. Questions arose about why an employee like Sarah Thompson, who was merely fulfilling her duties, faced such harsh consequences for a minor error. Additionally, why do companies seem to value policies more than the welfare of their customers? As this dialogue gained momentum, some industry experts noted that customer service training frequently fell short, lacking the essential resources for employees to handle the emotional intricacies of their roles. In numerous instances, employees were instructed to adhere to rules rigidly, without receiving guidance on navigating the complexities of human behavior. Customer service representatives, flight attendants, and others on the front lines frequently encountered scenarios where emotions were heightened, yet they were seldom prepared to manage those feelings adeptly. The incident involving Sarah Thompson underscored this training deficiency. She lacked the understanding and tools necessary to address a situation where empathy should have been prioritized. The aftermath for the airline was far from resolved. Their efforts to mend relations through public statements and promises of change were met with doubt. Many believed the airline prioritized its image over implementing substantial reforms. A mere apology and a policy review were insufficient. They needed to show a genuine understanding of the root causes of the situation. What was the purpose of revising procedures if the fundamental issues remained unaddressed? The effectiveness of new policies is questionable if the company culture fails to adapt in support of them. In response, a surge of advocacy groups emerged, advocating for enhanced consumer rights protections. These organizations contended that businesses must be held responsible for their treatment of vulnerable passengers, particularly those with medical conditions. They called for more transparent guidelines on how companies should manage special requests, and especially during emergencies. Their aim extended beyond altering airline policies. They sought to establish a uniform standard across various industries. Customer service for individuals with special needs requires a thoughtful approach. Training programs emphasizing empathy, emotional intelligence, and critical thinking are essential, enabling employees to make quick, informed decisions tailored to each customer's unique requirements. Meanwhile, Sarah Thompson found it challenging to progress. Although she received several job offers, none resonated with her. It wasn't a lack of desire to work, but rather a sense of uncertainty about her place in the world, influenced by the public perception surrounding her. Set, and she was at a loss for how to repair the harm done. She wasn't merely an ex-flight attendant. She had become emblematic of a much larger controversy. Despite her desire to escape it, the narrative seemed to shadow her relentlessly. However, as time passed, Sarah Thompson began to reassess the role she had been thrust into. She understood that while she couldn't alter the past, she had the power to shape the conclusion of her story. She began to voice her thoughts, not only to advocate for herself, but also to shed light on the wider issue at hand. She became involved in discussions surrounding the deficiency of emotional intelligence in customer service training, sharing her insights on how minor errors could escalate into significant issues when employees lacked the necessary skills to address them. It was challenging for her to re-engage, particularly after all she had experienced, but Sarah Thompson recognized the importance of continuing the dialogue. Gradually, she became involved in an expanding movement, pushing for reform, partnering with others in the field who were advocating for an empathetic approach to customer service is crucial, particularly when assisting passengers with special needs. Sarah Thompson's personal experiences provided her with a distinctive perspective in this discussion. She spoke from lived experiences rather than abstract concepts. Her engagement highlighted the necessity of revising customer service policies to incorporate greater flexibility, compassion, and understanding. The cancer patient also continued to advocate for passengers with special medical needs, consistently delivering a straightforward message. Companies needed to adopt a more flexible and empathetic approach when interacting with individuals like him. He wasn't seeking preferential treatment. Rather, he was advocating for fundamental understanding and necessary accommodations. As time went on, he began to represent a broader movement for change. What began as a simple meal request on a flight evolved into a powerful call for improved treatment of vulnerable passengers. Faced with mounting pressure, the airline ultimately took significant measures to implement changes, including a complete overhaul of their customer service training initiatives aimed at enhancing empathy and communication skills were implemented, alongside new protocols for addressing special requests from passengers with medical needs. However, many believed that the airline's actions were insufficient and came too late, as the harm to their reputation was not easily repairable. While some commended the airline for their efforts, others remained doubtful about their commitment to follow through, fearing that these changes might fade from memory. Sarah Thompson's experience began as a singular event, but ultimately it ignited a broader discussion regarding the inadequacies in how organizations manage their employees and customers. It transcended the incident of a flight attendant's dismissal, highlighting the flaws of a system overly fixated on efficiency, neglecting the human aspect. Although Sarah Thompson's experience was difficult, it illuminated these critical issues. While she couldn't change what had happened, she recognized her role in advocating for transformation in a world where empathy frequently gives way to efficiency. Was a source of pride. Months had gone by since Sarah Thompson's dismissal, yet the narrative was still unfolding. What initially appeared to be an isolated event had evolved into a broader dialogue concerning customer service standards, corporate accountability, and the significance of empathy in business. Sarah Thompson had carved out a quiet space amidst a cacophony of opinions, but her experience had raised more questions than it resolved. She had become a representation of a struggle that extended beyond her individual circumstances, and although it was challenging for her to move past the incidents that had transpired, at 3645, she came to understand that despite the media's shift and the public's focus on other scandals, she still had the power to shape her own story. Sarah Thompson found herself grappling with the consequences of an unexpected rise to fame, experiencing a strange blend of guilt, empowerment, and frustration. While she felt wronged, she also had to confront unsettling realities about herself and the system she had been a part of. The public's reaction had assisted her in realizing that the core problem extended beyond a single meal or employee. It was a profound flaw in how businesses treated both customers and the employees serving them. Gradually, Sarah Thompson began to share her experience publicly, though it was a challenging endeavor. Her words became more thoughtful, showcasing a nuanced comprehension of the complexities involved. She had learned, often through difficult experiences, that a company's culture could significantly influence outcomes. Her dismissal stemmed from a policy that favored uniformity over judgment that had taken away not only her job, but also her dignity. Nevertheless, Sarah Thompson decided to emphasize the lessons learned instead of dwelling on her loss. In her speeches and interviews, she recounted her experience not to assign blame, but to ignite a dialogue about necessary changes within the airline industry and corporate America as a whole. Her narrative transcended her personal story. She became an integral part of a broader movement advocating for a transformation in customer service. She underscored the importance of policies that empowered employees to engage in critical thinking. And with great compassion, particularly when engaging with those in vulnerable situations, individuals resonated with her narrative because fundamentally it centered on humanity and the treatment of individuals. Sarah Thompson's journey reflected the challenges faced by countless workers who felt marginalized within systems that were overly inflexible, prioritizing adherence to rules over genuine assistance. She encouraged employees across the board to raise their voices and seek greater adaptability in their customer interactions, while the cancer patient also persisted in his advocacy efforts. While his health continued to be his foremost concern, the media focus on his journey inspired him to leverage his platform for a greater cause. He addressed the necessity for medical accommodations, and advocated for increased awareness regarding how companies could better serve passengers with unique needs. Nevertheless, he was cautious to emphasize that this was not about seeking preferential treatment. Rather, it was about acknowledging the requirements of individuals who often go unnoticed and challenging the corporate mentality. His message had always been straightforward, but now it held greater significance. He wasn't merely representing his own interests, but voicing the concerns of all those who had ever felt overlooked or disregarded by the system. Their narratives, coupled with the increasing pressure on companies to enhance customer service, ultimately resulted in modest yet meaningful adjustments to industry standards. In reaction to the rising call for improved treatment of passengers with medical conditions, airlines nationwide began to adopt enhanced training programs, focusing on educating their staff on how to manage unique requests and navigate emergency scenarios with empathy and understanding. For the first time, there was a unified initiative to tackle the genuine challenges that travelers with medical requirements encountered while flying. Although it wasn't a complete solution, it represented progress. Still, Sarah Thompson recognized that the journey ahead would be lengthy. The systemic challenges she had experienced throughout her career wouldn't vanish instantly. She observed the improvements being implemented, but it would take years for them to fully materialize. Deeply embedded in the fabric of corporate America, an increasing number of companies began to acknowledge the significance of empathy in customer service. However, much work remained to be done. It was evident that transforming a culture rooted in rules and efficiency would not be achieved through mere policy adjustments or declarations. It necessitated a fundamental shift in the way businesses perceived both their employees and their customers. For Sarah Thompson, this journey was gradual. She transitioned to a new job in an entirely different field, leaving the airline industry behind. The transition was challenging, and it required time for her to regain her sense of stability. However, the lessons learned from her past remained with her. She no longer viewed herself merely as a component in a larger system. Instead, she recognized her potential to affect change, no matter how minor. She understood that her narrative resonated with others, which fueled her determination to advocate for change, even if it diverged from her initial intentions. Her journey had enlightened her to the fact that the distinctions between right and wrong are not always straightforward, particularly. In her experience with workplace policies, she realized that the human aspect could never be overlooked. Regardless of how well-meaning the regulations were, their effectiveness depended on the individuals enforcing them. Having witnessed the fallout from an excessive dependence on rigid systems, she emerged as a proponent of a more balanced and compassionate approach. Over time, Sarah Thompson's perspective contributed to a broader dialogue on the significance of emotional intelligence in the business realm, championing policies that empowered employees to think independently. As she began to share her own experiences, she recognized that she had inadvertently become part of a movement driven by circumstance rather than choice. This movement urged companies to reconsider their treatment of both employees and customers. Despite the significant personal toll it had taken on her, Sarah Thompson found comfort in the knowledge that her story had ignited an essential dialogue. Ultimately, she realized that while the past could not be altered, each individual possesses the ability to influence the future. The experiences gained from her dismissal and the subsequent repercussions had transformed her, and through her endeavors, she aspired to motivate others to advocate for a more compassionate and empathetic society, one where human needs held equal significance to policies. The months after Sarah Thompson's departure from the airline industry were filled with personal growth, introspection, and fresh challenges. Although she had left the position that had characterized her career for many years, the incidents of that pivotal flight continued to guide her journey. Although the media spotlight had faded, it had created enduring ripples, and Sarah Thompson's voice, once merely a quiet element of a team, had transformed into a catalyst for change in a broader conversation about corporate treatment of employees and customers. The relentless pursuit of perfection, a mindset she had adopted during her years as a flight attendant, had nearly shattered her. Yet it also ignited her desire for a more profound comprehension of the world around her. She became increasingly exasperated by how readily systems could abandon individuals for their missteps. But more crucially, she had come to realize that there were much larger forces influencing our interactions, particularly in professional environments. Sarah Thompson had seen firsthand how a minor communication error could spiral into a situation far more detrimental than anyone anticipated. Her own mistake, a misunderstanding regarding a meal request, had resulted in her losing her job. However, it also illuminated for her how frequently companies prioritize policies and profits over human needs. These revelations inspired her to start sharing her experiences. Sarah Thompson wasn't seeking to become a spokesperson for a cause. She had never intended to be in the public eye. However, the reaction to her firing revealed that the story extended beyond her individual experience. Feeling a sense of duty, she was determined to keep the conversation alive. She began connecting with advocacy groups dedicated to worker rights, customer service reform, and corporate accountability. In this way, she discovered a new purpose and started speaking at conferences, sharing her experiences with employees from various industries who had faced similar challenges. In those moments, her voice resonated with authenticity. She wasn't merely delivering a speech, but rather revealing the truth of her experiences and how they transformed her worldview. Her discussions extended beyond her personal challenges with being fired. They addressed the necessary systemic changes. She emphasized the significance of emotional intelligence in customer service roles, particularly in sectors where human interactions are paramount, such as airlines, hospitality, and retail. Explored the ways in which businesses can equip their employees to not only adhere to procedures, but also to listen, empathize, and make informed decisions that consider the human aspect of situations. Sarah Thompson had witnessed firsthand how insufficient training in these areas could create ripple effects that negatively impacted both customers and employees. It was at this point that Sarah Thompson's personal healing commenced. For the first time since the incident, she began to view the events of that flight from a wider lens. She realized she was not merely a victim of a broken system. She participated in a dialogue focused on building a more inclusive world for all, encompassing both employees and customers. Her experiences resonated deeply, becoming a source of inspiration for those who felt marginalized by corporate structures. Through her speeches, she forged connections with individuals who shared frustrations about businesses neglecting their needs and those of the communities they served. At the same time, the cancer patient whose situation had ignited the discussion was also making significant progress following the media attention. As the frenzy subsided, he persisted in his efforts to promote improved accommodations for individuals with medical conditions. His message was clear. Those with health needs were not seeking preferential treatment, but rather fundamental dignity and empathy. In the months after the incident, he ensured his voice was prominent, engaging in forums, giving interviews, and connecting with organizations dedicated to disability rights and accessibility in public services. The bond between Sarah Thompson and the cancer patient had, in certain respects, been born from a moment of miscommunication. It evolved into a shared awareness of the systemic problems affecting customer service. The cancer patient discovered comfort in the larger dialogue surrounding empathy and the human aspect of business. He had never aimed to be a catalyst for change, yet the experience opened his eyes to the necessity for individuals in authority, be it in corporations or government, to grasp the everyday challenges faced by those dealing with health issues. He began collaborating with organizations dedicated to enhancing accessibility in public spaces, such as airlines, hospitals, and government buildings. As he shared his experiences, he increasingly recognized the influence of his voice, understanding that it extended beyond a single airline to encompass a broader societal change in the treatment of individuals with medical conditions across all aspects of life. Although the airline implemented some changes in response to public pressure, many perceived these adjustments as merely cosmetic. They had rolled out new training programs and committed to conducting reviews. Their policies, yet for many, these actions fell short. Sarah Thompson was acutely aware of this. The corporate landscape frequently resisted change, particularly regarding entrenched company cultures that had persisted for decades. Despite the airline's attempts to recover from the incident, numerous passengers and employees perceived the company's efforts as inadequate. The public remained skeptical, questioning whether the changes were authentic or merely a response to negative publicity. For Sarah Thompson, it was evident that the necessary transformations required to be more profound and comprehensive. She emphasized the importance of fostering a culture of empathy within companies, extending beyond just customer service to encompass the entire organization. Merely having a few good policies on paper was insufficient. A fundamental change in how businesses viewed their relationships with both employees and customers was essential. Companies needed to understand that the human element was central to their success. Without it, genuine connections and loyalty would be unattainable. Whether it was employees or customers, Sarah Thompson's message was clear. Systems could be improved and policies could be updated, but without genuine cultural transformation, nothing would endure. She recounted her experience to illustrate how quickly things could deteriorate when companies neglected to evolve, and emphasized the necessity of truly hearing the voices of those they served, rather than solely focusing on profits. Although she had lost her job, she discovered something far more significant, a renewed sense of purpose. In the years that followed, Sarah Thompson emerged as a champion for change, becoming a prominent voice in an expanding initiative that urged companies to prioritize individuals over policies. As the narrative of Sarah Thompson and the cancer patient receded from the news, their commitment to effecting change persisted. Both had discovered their role within a broader movement advocating for more empathetic, human-focused business practices. The journey ahead remained challenging, yet they recognized that they had already ignited a significant shift. It wasn't merely about transforming a single airline. It was about redefining the way all businesses engage with their customers and employees. Throughout this journey, Sarah Thompson came to understand that even in the face of failure, growth was possible, and from that growth, genuine change could arise. As Sarah Thompson continued to navigate her new life in the sense of purpose she had discovered, she faced moments that tested her determination. The energy from her discussions, interviews, and advocacy began to gain traction. Yet setbacks were inevitable. She soon recognized that while she had ignited a conversation, transforming that dialogue into meaningful, enduring change would prove to be far more challenging than she had anticipated, especially within the corporate realm. Growing recognition of the need for more compassionate policies was met with a gradual acceptance of the profound changes she envisioned. Sarah Thompson's urgency intensified as she listened to the experiences of workers, especially in sectors such as retail, hospitality, and healthcare, where employees frequently encountered scenarios requiring adherence to strict policies. Even when those policies did not meet the needs of customers, it became evident that this issue extended beyond a single airline or industry. It was a broader concern, a cultural oversight in companies that valued efficiency more than the individuals they served. Sarah Thompson's frustration intensified as she engaged with employees from various industries who felt equally confined by corporate regulations. They recounted experiences of customers with special needs being overlooked, health issues being dismissed, and challenging circumstances being managed with impersonal bureaucracy instead of compassion. As Sarah Thompson absorbed their stories, she recognized that the extent of the issue was much greater than she had initially thought. Initially, she believed that the issue extended beyond merely encouraging employees to show more empathy. It was about fundamentally transforming the way businesses engage with individuals in distressing or vulnerable circumstances. Her advocacy efforts began to evolve accordingly. What started as a personal mission to voice her experiences, defend her actions, and clarify the reasons behind her termination gradually transformed into a broader call for systemic change. She began collaborating with organizations dedicated to worker advocacy, mental health in the workplace, and corporate accountability. Her approach transformed from merely altering the operations of a single company or industry to reshaping the fundamental principles of business conduct. Sarah Thompson's discussions expanded beyond the significance of empathy, which remained a core theme, to encompass the concept of power, specifically how corporations exercise power over employees and customers. She highlighted how this power was frequently employed to impose regulations that overlooked the real-life experiences of individuals. As Sarah Thompson's ideas progressed, so did the movement surrounding her, attracting an increasing number of supporters. Her cause was championed by workers silenced by corporate regulations, customers mistreated by impersonal systems, and even other companies eager to foster meaningful cultural changes. Sarah Thompson received invitations to participate in panels, engage with corporate leaders, and consult for businesses striving to adopt more humane, people-first policies. Despite the obstacles, Sarah Thompson found herself in a distinctive role. She had emerged as a thought leader in a burgeoning movement, yet there remained a significant amount of work ahead. In her personal life, Sarah Thompson began to recognize how her advocacy efforts were transforming her perspective. Previously, she had been someone who adhered to rules without hesitation, but now she found herself challenging everything about the systems that had influenced her. She started to question the beliefs she had been taught to accept as the status quo. Sarah Thompson discovered the importance of taking risks and resisting norms that did not benefit the greater good. Even more significantly, she realized the necessity of providing others with the opportunity to express themselves. During her meetings with other employees, particularly those in low-wage, customer-facing roles, Sarah Thompson became acutely aware of the deep-seated frustration present in the workforce. These individuals were eager to assist and serve their customers with genuine care, yet they often felt confined by a system that hindered their efforts. As Sarah Thompson continued her reflections, she began to grasp that her experience was not merely about a single flight attendant losing her job. It was indicative of a broader failure in communication. Employers and employees, the discussion centered on how the corporate landscape had transformed into a mechanism that prioritized consistency and profit above all else, frequently undermining personal dignity. Sarah Thompson had been one of the numerous victims of this system, yet her role provided her with a distinct chance to effect change. She was now deeply engaged in advocacy, striving to alter the prevailing narrative within corporate America. During this period, a pivotal moment arose when Sarah Thompson received outreach from a prominent business consultancy that had been after her advocacy efforts. There was a search for a leader to spearhead a new initiative aimed at embedding empathy into corporate culture. This initiative, named Human-Centered Business, would collaborate with companies from diverse industries to encourage a reevaluation of their treatment of both customers and employees. It would concentrate on nurturing understanding, emotional intelligence, and adaptability in customer service, while promoting a cultural transformation within organizations that values people above profit during critical moments. Was significant. It marked a pivotal moment for Sarah Thompson. The offer aligned perfectly with her long-held aspirations, a chance to instigate genuine change within the corporate realm. For the first time since her dismissal, she sensed an opportunity to influence the very system that had led to her setback. This was her moment to engage in the transformation, rather than merely advocate from the sidelines. Sarah Thompson embraced the role, which brought with it a fresh array of challenges. The work was rigorous and necessitated deep, critical thinking. Strategically, something she hadn't engaged in much during her time as a flight attendant. However, this new position enabled her to concentrate on the broader perspective. She wasn't merely assisting a single company or employee. She was aiding various organizations in transforming their policies, culture, and customer service strategies. She discovered herself collaborating with leaders who had previously appeared unattainable, guiding them to realize that embracing empathy and understanding could coexist with achieving business objectives. In fact, the more businesses concentrated on addressing the needs of their employees and customers, the greater their potential for success. However, this journey was not without challenges. Sarah Thompson and Ed, along with other CEOs and board members, faced skepticism from those who viewed empathy as a trivial skill unfit for the boardroom. Some companies hesitated to alter their policies, clinging to outdated practices or fearing that too much flexibility would result in disorder. Sarah Thompson found it difficult to accept that not everyone was prepared for this shift. Change. Yet she had come to understand that true transformation required time, persistence, compromise, and a readiness to meet people at their level. As Sarah Thompson embraced this new role, she rediscovered the passion that had motivated her journey thus far. Her focus shifted from her own experiences to fostering environments where others could express their stories as well. She led workshops for employees across different industries, empowering them to find their voices and learn to advocate for themselves. Faced circumstances that seemed off, and she collaborated closely with HR departments to create training programs focused on emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and active listening. Sarah Thompson had evolved significantly from the flight attendant who once merely adhered to regulations. She had transformed into a figure who was actively redefining the norms. Her mission was to foster a business environment where individuals were valued more than profits, and where understanding, empathy, and connection served as the core principles of a more sustainable future. As she continued to spearhead the transformation in business practices, Sarah Thompson came to understand that what she once perceived as the worst incident of her life had actually served as a catalyst for something far more significant. It had illuminated broader issues within the workplace and beyond, empowering her to become an advocate for change. Her journey had evolved from a devastating mistake to a mission capable of reshaping corporate operations, one conversation at a time. Reflecting on her path, in light of everything that had occurred, Sarah Thompson found herself contemplating her journey. What began as a mere misunderstanding, a meal request from a cancer patient, had evolved into a pivotal moment in her life. It was an experience that had deeply affected her, initially perceived as a conclusion. However, as months turned into years, Sarah Thompson recognized that it had actually marked the start of something far more profound. Her narrative, once viewed as a personal misfortune, had transformed into a tale of change, not only for herself but for others as well. Countless others who found themselves in similar situations. Throughout her journey, Sarah Thompson learned to reshape her understanding of failure and success. She no longer perceived failure as a final destination. Instead, she recognized it as an essential component of personal growth. This was a lesson that many individuals often grasped only later in life: how to confront setbacks directly, comprehend their underlying causes, and leverage that insight to move ahead. Sarah Thompson had to confront her failure in the most challenging manner, yet the very experience that almost shattered her became a catalyst for her resilience. This experience ignited a passion in her to create something innovative and improved. Her efforts in human-centered business had flourished. What started as a consultancy with a few companies had expanded across various sectors, including retail, healthcare, transportation, and technology. An increasing number of organizations were acknowledging the significance of empathy in their practices, not merely as a catchy phrase, but as a genuine catalyst for customer satisfaction, employee loyalty, and sustainable success. Sarah Thompson was no longer addressing audiences merely to elevate awareness. Recognition that she was actively influencing the future of business culture. Companies started to realize that promoting a human-centered approach was not merely a moral obligation, but a strategic advantage. Content and loyal employees resulted in satisfied customers, which ultimately led to increased profits, reduced turnover, and enhanced reputations. Sarah Thompson's efforts with businesses facilitated the dismantling of barriers between management and staff. She championed policies that empowered employees with greater autonomy to make decisions rooted in empathy and understanding. Recognizing the unique needs of customers, she championed the establishment of support systems within organizations that encourage employees to voice concerns and advocate for clients, particularly those with special requirements. By emphasizing communication and empathy, she enabled companies to understand that adopting a more human approach was not detrimental to their profits, but rather a route to success. Sarah Thompson's influence extended beyond corporations. She also emerged as a staunch advocate for workers' rights in ways she had never anticipated, reaching many through her presentations. Numerous employees in customer-facing positions felt unheard, confined to roles that demanded adherence to rigid procedures, often at odds with their personal values. Sarah Thompson's message to them was unequivocal. You are not merely an extension of a company's policies. You are a human being with your own instincts, needs, and judgments. By urging employees to trust their instincts, think critically in challenging situations, and acknowledge the humanity of those they served, Sarah Thompson was fostering a transformative change, a workplace culture that appreciated employees' judgment and emotional intelligence. Alongside her work with various companies, Sarah Thompson emerged as a champion for policy reform, advocating for labor laws that would empower employees in customer service roles, particularly those in positions such as flight attendants, retail workers, and other frontline staff who frequently needed to make immediate decisions affecting customer satisfaction. She collaborated with labor unions and advocacy organizations to suggest new regulations aimed at enhancing protections for these workers. Employees should not face repercussions for making decisions that, with the benefit of hindsight, might be viewed as errors. She contended that these individuals required enhanced legal safeguards, particularly in sectors where regulations frequently overlooked the intricate human dynamics of the circumstances they encountered each day. The cancer patient, too, discovered a revitalized sense of purpose. While his health continued to be paramount, his experiences after the flight incident sparked a previously unrecognized passion for advocacy. He collaborated with Sarah Thompson on numerous initiatives. Efforts directed at enhancing accommodations for individuals with medical conditions, especially within the travel sector, have led to the development of guidelines for airlines and other transportation providers. These guidelines emphasize not only physical accommodations, but also the importance of emotional sensitivity and understanding when assisting passengers with special needs. His participation in this movement infused his experience with a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, transcending his own personal challenges. He was no longer just advocating for himself, he was standing up for anyone who felt overlooked or dismissed due to their health issues. Through Sarah Thompson's partnership with the cancer patient and numerous other advocates, a larger movement started to emerge. This movement urged corporations to reconsider how they prioritized human dignity alongside profits. They weren't seeking preferential treatment. They were calling for a fundamental level of respect and comprehension for policies that could adapt to the intricacies involved. As time passed, the genuine efforts of individuals began to bear fruit, with an increasing number of businesses embracing human-centered approaches and reconsidering their treatment of both employees and customers. Sarah Thompson, too, took time to contemplate her own personal development since the incident. What had once seemed like a public humiliation transformed in retrospect into a pivotal moment that shaped her into a better individual, a more resilient leader, and a more compassionate advocate. She had gained the ability to recognize the subtleties in every circumstance and to foster understanding. That life was not merely black and white, and to recognize the significance of kindness and adaptability in a world that frequently insisted on conformity. Naturally, there were moments of doubt. She still faced opposition from those who perceived her message of empathy and flexibility as overly idealistic or too gentle. However, as time passed, Sarah Thompson understood that transformation does not occur instantaneously. Change requires perseverance, dedication, and the courage to confront obstacles, even when the path ahead appears unclear. Each minor triumph, the businesses that embraced her vision, contributed to her journey. The employees who expressed their gratitude for being heard, along with the customers who shared improved experiences, affirmed the conviction that this movement was a worthy cause. Sarah Thompson's journey had reached its conclusion. What began as a singular event had evolved into a worldwide dialogue surrounding corporate empathy, human rights in the workplace, and customer-focused service. Through her advocacy, she had contributed to the creation of an environment where individuals were valued above policies and where businesses acknowledged that their achievements were fundamentally linked to the dignity of people and the well-being of those they served. Reflecting on the situation, Sarah Thompson realized that the narrative surrounding the cancer patient's meal request had evolved beyond a single individual's error or a company's shortcoming. It had sparked a significant transformation, influencing numerous industries, organizations, and lives. Standing at the forefront of this change, Sarah Thompson could now assert with certainty that what once seemed like a tragic conclusion had blossomed into a beginning of something far more profound and impactful: the ability to create a meaningful and enduring impact. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, remember to subscribe for more content like this. The story of Sarah Thompson and the cancer passenger highlights the importance of empathy and flexibility in human interactions, especially in high-pressure work environments. The key lesson is, following the rules is necessary, but understanding and compassion can make a big difference, especially when dealing with special needs. A small mistake, such as a misunderstanding about a meal request, can escalate into a crisis if not listened to and handled sensitively. Furthermore, the story shows that failure is not an endpoint, but an opportunity to grow, learn, and create positive change. In today's American context, where businesses are focused on efficiency and profits, This story reminds us that empathy is a key factor in building trust and loyalty from both customers and employees. Industries such as airlines, retail, and healthcare often face situations that require flexibility beyond the routine. Applying empathy to customer service not only improves the experience, but also strengthens your brand reputation. Take the time to understand the needs of others, especially in sensitive situations. When appropriate, consider adjusting processes to meet individual needs. View failures as opportunities to improve yourself and your system. Businesses should invest in their employees' communication and problem-solving skills. By following these principles, we can build a more humane society where people come before profits.